Welcome to the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Jen Sproul, CEO of the Institute of Internal Communication. Our organisations continue to face an onslaught of challenges, and the way we work requires dramatic transformation and response. Internal communication is a crucial function that helps organisations achieve lasting change. It's also the glue that holds organisations together in hybrid and distributed working environments. This podcast explores opportunity for internal communicators in the future of work. The world is changing, and so must we. We hope you really enjoy listening.
Hi, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I am your co-host, Kat Barnard, and I'm joined, as ever, by Dominic Walters and Jen Sproul. Today's bonus episode stems from conversations that we had at the start of 2024 when we realised that the Institute of Internal Communication's IC Index report was going to focus quite heavily on trust. I don't think it's an understatement to say that as we continue to seemingly fumble our way through new ways of working, how we create and maintain and sustain trust at work becomes ever more of a pressing issue. I think, we can point to engagement data collated by both Gallup and Volunteer Movement Engage for Success that points to engagement levels here in the UK certainly being as low as 10%. So we know we've got quite a significant amount of human work to do as we try and rebuild some sense of momentum within the UK economy. And trust is a really interesting topic for us, just because when you start to try and research it or even define it, it becomes very, very nebulous and quite difficult to qualify and quantify. So on those grounds, really, what we wanted to do was identify somebody with more knowledge than we had, which, let's face it, probably wasn't that difficult. But we wanted to try and identify somebody who's done some work in this area to come and have a chat with us today. So I'm really, really pleased to welcome James Ball onto the podcast. James is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster, and author. He's a fellow of the think tank Demos, and he's also the political editor of The New European. He's worked as the global editor of TBIJ, a special correspondent at BuzzFeed, and has been special projects editor at The Guardian, where he played a key role in the Pulitzer Prize winning coverage of the NSA leaks by Edward Snowden, as well as various other offshore leaks. So I think it's fair to say that James has got quite the steer on the role of trust in society, and actually also what can happen or what does happen when trust becomes at a premium in society. So I would like to welcome him onto the podcast. I know he's got lots and lots to share with us, and I'm really thrilled that finally, we were able to get to this point where we could record today. So James, welcome.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. I feel like even the call that we had to set up this podcast, my head was bursting with snippets and information after we chatted initially. And I know you've done a lot of work in this area of trust and ethics. So I wondered if I could defer to you and just kick off the conversation by asking, how do you personally define trust? And then my part two of that question is, and why is it so important?
So we can end up sort of dancing around and getting very philosophical when we talk about trust, which sort of perhaps ironically can make us sound quite shifty. And generally it comes down to when someone says something, how widely believed in it. And I tend to think we get ourselves in a lot of trouble by asking people lots of questions about trust. And that tells you less than you'd hope. Lots of people, for example, say that they don't really trust the British media. And there's lots of reasons not to trust the British media. We get things wrong. There are biases. There are all sorts. I would say generally we're doing our best in a very fast-moving world. But part of that in British culture is that a bit of skepticism is encouraged. people know that the right answer is not to be too naive and not to be too credulous. It is, if you say to someone, oh, well, you can't trust everything you read in the papers, they're not going to look at you like you're being strange. That's a good opinion. People are going to nod along. And so we have quite low reported trust in our media. But actually, if you look at how people live and act day to day, people tend to actually act like they do trust the media. People generally do watch a BBC report and think they're getting more or less the truth of the story. People, for all that they say they don't really trust newspapers, they might be buying fewer print papers, but they're going to them online in higher numbers than they ever have. And so when you look at what trust means, we are still lucky to live in a high trust society. People generally don't worry too much about corruption. You trust your bank to make a payment. You trust generally that the law will protect you at work. We don't tend to worry, most of us, thankfully, that we'll be illegally fired or that we won't get paid. We don't all demand our wages at the end of the day. We're happy to wait a month. We will trust that parcels will be delivered. Trust is sort of what holds society together, and it's generally that we believe the system will work as it should. Now, I would say we're in a good place generally in the UK, although it could be better, in that it is valued to be skeptical. You don't have to say, oh no, of course I trust Pravda, of course I trust the government, because you fear what would happen if you said otherwise. We value skepticism, but we generally sort of trust but verify. And I think that we will probably end up touching on some quite worrying areas because you tend to with this topic. I should start by saying generally, I think in this country we're in a relatively good place.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? As you were speaking, I was thinking it's almost part of the British persona, isn't it? To be cynical, to appear cynical and to appear a bit kind of half-hearted about your full-blown belief in things, which I suppose extends to institutions. But I guess also we've had some pretty interesting years in politics in the last decade or so, haven't we? In terms of we've all been taken down a path of white lies and on a spectrum to blatant untruths. And I think that's done, I guess, on the one side of things, it's heightened the curiosity around what is trust, why is it so important? But on the other hand, I think obviously we're now a month or so into a new government administration, and it's quite nice to wake up in the morning and feel like our politicians are actually doing the job that we hope they will do with nothing to see here, to some degree. I woke up the morning after the election and felt, gosh, thank goodness for a return to boring politics, that we would just resume the very British diplomatic way of being. I find myself just endlessly fascinated by the construct of trust and how one becomes trustworthy and what that means. And I know we talked about it internally. Sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant. And just my point of curiosity is that it's such a personal thing and it's such a context-specific thing. And if you asked 100 people what trust is, I think you would probably get 100 different answers. And if you were to ask them today and then ask them again tomorrow, you'd probably get 100 different variations on what the answer was that they gave you today as well.
That's sort of why I tend to lean towards the pragmatic on these things. I think there's things that people like, even if people would define it differently or say what they're looking for is differently. I've tended to find people really like it when people talk about the limit of their expertise. I don't know is a really good answer for trust, and it makes your other answers look better. Or if someone says, okay, here's what I know, and then here's what I'm figuring from that. They can say the rest of this, I'm sort of speaking from guesswork. I don't have data on this, and so I know this bit, I'm telling you this bit. Or also even things just as simple as going, actually, there's a bit more to this, but I can't tell you. There's an ongoing court case, there's rules that mean I can't do it, or perhaps in a work context, actually there's a disciplinary process, there's legal reasons I can't tell you. I think that'll be done at X time. And if you ask me then, I'll tell you everything I can. But here's what I can tell you for now, rather than, I think sometimes people don't want to look like they don't know something or don't want to look like they can't say something. And in trying not to look evasive, you look more evasive. And so there's things that tend to, I make them sound like tricks, work on us all, that sort of carry forward. And they tend to be different now than they were a while ago. Authority used to be the big thing in trust. Who's saying it? Do they have the right accent? Do they have the right tie? Do they work for the right place? I think that's a lot less true, and people rebel against that. But I don't think you're ever going to get the very earnest American, I believe in everything, I'm fully signed up brand of trust here. It doesn't feel British. Everyone wants a little bit of detachment, a little bit of cynicism here. But that doesn't mean that we don't trust. It just means people are always going to look a bit more guarded. And also, there is a reason the phrase is healthy skepticism. Cynicism is incredibly damaging, but skepticism is good.
I think the way you say that, James, is really interesting. And like you say, it's part of the being a skeptic is kind of it's part of that character that we have. And I think thinking about trust the way we think about it from internal commerce point of view, it's kind of, well, if we have that commodity that we can't quite describe or put a value on it, then that means that then perhaps that will create the behaviors and actions or the loyalties or the things that we need to deliver as a company. But putting that aside, I think one of the things that I'm quite interested by what you're saying as well is that we've used the word trust, but there's also then the word belief. So where does trust become belief, and where does fact and truth come into that? Because we can trust something because we believe it, but do we know it's fact and truth? And I think if those constructs, I guess, of belief and what you say happens breaks down. I'm trying to use inverted commas on trust now because I think we're trying to be too delicate about the word. And I say that in the context of communications and content, in the way that we live, and we have an attention grabbing deficit economy with so much content and things and the rise of disinformation perhaps and ideologies or other things that are going off. So I guess from what I'm going to is, from your point of view, what work do you do in journalism to build that trust, and how do you think trust and belief come together, but how does truth and fact play within that? And why do you think it's necessary for us to have, I guess, that trust?
I mean, there's something immensely frustrating for journalists in this. And my background's actually data and statistics. I used to be data editor at The Guardian, among other things. And as someone who's researched trust, one of the incredibly frustrating things is there is good evidence that fact and evidence do not move beliefs. You will not change someone's mind if you give them figures, even if they are true. And essentially, what's pleasing about this is it hasn't really moved anyone in the evidence community. People still keep trying to change minds with fact checks or with, updated briefings or with sort of this kind of stuff. Now, this doesn't mean we should abandon them. And it doesn't mean if you can back these things up, it helps your credibility, it helps that kind of thing. But it's not going to change a mind. It might help your individual reputation. It might help your corporate reputation with people who will hear it. But essentially, this is the old thing to go to politics of someone says, well, my mom and my brother, they both go out and try and buy their weekly shops and they can't feed their families. And someone goes, well, actually, food poverty is down 3% versus 2 years ago, and things are getting better on that. They're not going to turn around and go, oh, is it? Well, great, thanks. And sort of similarly in an organisation, if someone sort of says, well, actually, we've got none of the equipment we need and it seems to take longer and longer to replace, and you go, actually, across the company, we've taken it from 3 weeks to 2.5 weeks on the typical order, they're just going to hear you denying them. Even if everyone's telling the truth, it doesn't work. And not much changes people's minds. We know that. But what works in terms of trust, as far as we can tell, and as far as we can measure, and all of this is a bit abstract, is people like it when someone starts where they are. And so if you go, I'm sorry to hear about that, and if it's something people can look into, actually, if you've got any ideas as to why that's happening, can you let me know? I'd like to know more about it to see if we can tackle that. Maybe that's there to your site. And then you can get into it. You can say, we've been working to make this better. It may be that we've missed something and we can do that as well. And that can help. But the more you can get to, we still tend to think in terms of us and them. If right to the point of if someone you like sort of shouts at someone else in front of you, you might go over to them and say, I'm so sorry. They're a lovely person. They're having a terrible day. Their dog's very sick at home. I think they're quite stressed. They've been up all night. They're not like that. I will try and get him to apologize to you later. If it's someone you don't like, just go, he's always like that, isn't he? What a bad person he is. Circumstances versus character. And so the more that you can, not falsely, but the more you can get into someone's in-group, the more you can be talking about we. How could we tackle this? What could we do? The better it tends to come across with people if you are actually taking it on board. If you start just treating the word we like a magic tool, people clock it pretty fast. All of this is so layered and so nuanced. It is a lot of that. If you start going, no, here's the facts, it doesn't work. If you sort of start where they are, you can introduce some of them and they might be more listened to.
Totally take that on board. And I think I like the way you describe that listen and that we action. And I think that's really fascinating what you say is like evidence doesn't change a belief or a mindset necessarily. So I guess with the picture of trust as well, what have you done or is going on, do you think, to build that trust in journalism? Or is, where do you think that sits within that context?
So one of the things I write about is conspiracy theory. How do people start to believe that a mass shooting was a false flag, or that a terror attack didn't really happen, or that there's satanic rituals going along? And again, the trick is when you're talking to someone individually, it's to sort of say, well, what's made you think that? What's the evidence there? Because people who believe this stuff, some people want to just say, well, you have to be an idiot to believe that, wouldn't you? And no, you wouldn't. People are curious. They're trying to get their own answers. What evidence there is on people who go down conspiracy rabbit holes tend to have a slightly higher IQ than average. They often have advanced degrees. There are some Nobel laureates who are now very, very strange conspiracy cranks. And so being clever is no insulation against these things. And so if you can start by going, why would you believe that? What makes you believe that? And then sort of treat the curiosity as legitimate. Go, well, actually, I know what happened in this instance. Or go, someone asks about Jeffrey Epstein, go, yeah, that does look strange. I don't know the answers on that one. But a lot of the things people used to say about it aren't true. And they're actually being used to sort of sow a bit of division and stop us looking at the real one. And so it's that thing of, even if a conspiracy can lead to some very strange places, don't look at the people who are already fully down the rabbit hole, but look at the ones who might go into it. And in terms of the media, I think rather than look at these weirdos who believe this weird thing, it's, well, what's really happening with this? Ask the question, go into it and go, well, why do people think that that's there? How do we know it's not? What does this photo really show? And showing in context, well, here's the viral post that a lot of people think proves this. And actually, here's how we established it's doctored. And sort of also go, here's what we still don't know, but we'll try and find out. And if people think you're taking it seriously and they're being respected and it's not, well, you don't agree with this obviously correct opinion, I think it tends to work a lot better. And there is a danger in the media that we all know the rules that we work by. There's all sorts of codes and restrictions and rules and what it means to say a government source versus the government spokesman versus the bits of code that often we just forget the public don't know and have no reason to know. And so we're asking them to just take a lot on trust when we're not explaining our workings. And people tend to like to see the workings. That's the thing that's changed. They're not just going to take it because you're saying it. And that, I think, can be healthier, provided we move with the times and do it.
James, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how we can apply what you're talking about to internal communication. I had a quick look at your Wikipedia entry, and I see that once you gave a talk which you called Bathing in Bullshit, which is a fantastic title. as well as being great alliteration. But it did strike a chord, actually, because having been an internal communication manager, I have been accused in the past of being a source of bullshit or things like it. And I think, in my experience, people in organizations tend more towards cynicism than skepticism, to use your very useful definition. So it would be really helpful to try and apply some of what you said to internal communication. And I think I could pull out a number of things, but it'd be good to get your take on it. First of all, I love the idea about being able to say, I don't know, because in our experience, leaders and managers and organizations are even less likely to say that than perhaps people outside, because of politics, because of position power, because of all the stuff that goes with that. And I find it really hard. I train leaders a lot, and helping them just to say, I don't know, is a really big thing. I think the other thing you mentioned was about starting where they are. That's incredibly helpful internally, because establishing a shared agenda and trying to avoid this competitive aspect, I think, is a really good way of bringing people together. And I think you also talked about, it's about the fact that figures and facts don't convince. And I sort of knew that, but when you said it out loud, I thought, well, that makes a huge amount of sense. And I know that reflects a lot of the stuff around people who are driven by emotion. Was it Kahneman's stuff around you're more driven by emotion than you are about facts, that sort of thing as well. So those are some of the things that struck me. But from your experience of working in organizations, what do you think are some of the key aspects of trust and authenticity, why they're so important for internal communication and what we can do as internal communicators?
I mean, the only sort of role in which I've had what we would have called a senior management job was quite a small organization. It's about 40 people, but most of the employees of the organization were investigative journalists. And that, firstly, generally, actually, they're a lovely workforce, but the reputation of investigative journalists is like it's herding cats. But also, you've got a whole bunch of people who are quite good at finding things out. And so, naturally, even in trying to run quite an open culture and trying to run a thing, there would always be times where people wanted to keep something under the rug. And my experience was every single time that was a mistake. And any time that we thought, isn't it better to know more before we communicate, that turned out to be an error. And one of the big things for us would be, this is TBIJ, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, great organisation. Strongly recommend anyone look it up if they like good journalism. But a lot of funding would come through grants. And so you'd have a 3-year grant for a particular programme, and they'd come up for renewal. And because you've got to go through a very formal grant-making process, you wouldn't know. And the default attitude was always, well, let's try not to have people worry about their job. I would just say, oh, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. And it was such a mistake and such a source of stress for people, because actually just being able to say, everything we've heard from this is good. There's no guarantees on it. They have stressed there's no guarantees, but they like our work. We've had no concerns raised. We're going into this expecting it to be renewed, and I'll let you know if that changes. It was amazing how much people appreciated that. But we did then sometimes have to go, okay, actually our program managers quit. We've been told not to worry about the new one, but there is a new program manager. I wanted you to hear from me first. And we generally found we got a much better response from communicating what we thought was unnecessary detail that would bother people. I think it was that they trusted us that they'd hear when there was bad news instead of it being saved up. And we did have times where grants weren't renewed and sort of came out and said it very quickly. But similarly, sort of handling things during COVID, I tended to find as a senior team, especially when we were in uncharted territory of trying to move immediately to remote work, having not done it, having to try and deal with people being scattered. Some people had gone to sort of stay with parents in the country and had no internet or terrible internet. And there's this thing of, for one person, we did have to say, actually, if you're going to work remotely, you need to be able to work remotely. You may have to come back to your London flat because you can't work. You're not working. We gave them time and some weeks. But what we tried to do initially was work out what we thought people wanted and then present that to them because we thought we were saving stress. And I would find each time I'd hear through people's managers, oh, actually, they would have preferred to do this, or why did you rule that out? And I found myself quite often going, we could have done that. There's no reason we couldn't have done that. And actually, once I took it back to the senior team, that was fine. And so increasingly, we started consulting before and actually going, here's what we think works. What have we missed? And again, that helps. Now, that's something you can do a lot more easily in an organisation of 40 than in an organisation of 4,000. But being a bit more open and a bit more unsure, and also saying why we couldn't do some things that were popular. There's always something people want. And actually going, well, we could say we could do this, but it costs 10 grand and then we'll have to cancel X, Y, and Z. And you'd hear back quite quickly. Someone else on senior team would be going, they really, really want this. We really have to do this. Let's make the hard decision and cancel this stuff. And go, actually, before we make it, shall we tell them what it costs? And somebody go, oh, God, no, if it costs 10 grand, absolutely not. We'd much rather you sort of do X, Y, or Z, or, we still have a training budget, or we still have a travel budget. And just sort of, it really surprised me how even in a news organisation and a sort of quite flat, non-traditional organisation, the instincts went to, let's communicate when we know things, let's communicate when we've got an agreed line, when it's clear, and how often that was a mistake. I really, really think my experience as a manager and then as a more junior manager in bigger organisations was that every organisation under-communicates. And the longer that you wait to be sure, I think there's an instinct among management, and I've done it myself, to assume that while you're not saying anything, everyone's sitting very quietly and waiting for news. And instead, they're filling it with all sorts of things that they've heard or half remembered or guessed that are probably much worse than the worst version of what you have. Sorry, that's a very, very rambling answer.
No, it's a very good answer, because I think it reinforces some things that I guess ring bells with many of the people listening, which is particularly during change, even nowadays, actually, lots of change managers will say, we'll wait until there's something to say, for fear of saying the wrong thing or giving the wrong impression. And I understand that, but you're right. The downside is people start to make things up, or they speculate about stuff, or they fear that nothing's happening. There's no sense of momentum. So I think they forget sometimes that communications, we talked about a lot on this podcast, is around connection, regularity. It's around a feeling of safety, as well as giving people information. I think you've illustrated that point really, really well. I'd just like to go back to your point about saying, I don't know, and saying, here's what needs to happen before we can tell you this, or here's the information behind it. From your experience, there must be a balance to strike between saying, I don't know, which I get, and at some point, people rolling their eyes saying, well, let's go and talk to someone who does know. In your experience, how do you strike that balance? Again, a very difficult question, I suspect, but what's your experience on that?
It's a very good question, and I don't know if there's a good answer to it. He says cheating, but I think if you're saying it all the time, people are going to suspect you've been put in front of them because you know nothing. It is a good answer if you are answering other questions with information, especially if you're saying, I'll try and find out, or we don't know that yet. We think we'll hear it in a week or two. Or let's say it's a big office move and going, actually, who's sitting at what desk? I don't know yet. I know you'll be on the second floor. Someone else is taking care of that, but that's actually a bit down the line. If people can sense that you're trying to answer what you know and not answer where you don't, it adds to your credibility. If people think that you're there to stonewall them, it works when you are staying in your lane, so to speak, I think. And if it's beyond that, it probably doesn't. We see this sometimes in the media. You realise that someone's been put in front of you because they don't know any more than the briefing. And it tends to go quite badly for those people, because you eventually go, well, why don't you just give us the piece of paper in front of you, since you're just reading out from it? And they tend not to want to do that. And then it's like, well, how happy are you about wasting all of our time?
And I will pass over to Jen just shortly, but I think to add to that as well, it's the ability of that particular manager or leader to be able to ask questions as well, to get the conversation going. Because you're right, it's not just about me standing up in front of a group of people and being expected to know everything. I need to engage them in conversation, go back to your earlier point, to find out what they think about stuff, how they value things, their priorities. So I totally get what you say.
I mean, there's sort of two ways you can get surprised in these things. Someone can ask you a question and you go, oh, I don't know if we've thought about that. We need to. Thank you. I really will get back to you on that because that's a good question and we need to know the answer to that. But there's also the number of times, and I wish I could think of a specific example. Someone asks, "Oh, so you're not going to do X, are you?" It's like, or I've heard we might do X. It's like, oh no, of course we're not going to do that. No, that's absolutely off the table. That hadn't even occurred to us that someone might think that, but I promise you, no, that's not part of this. And so those opportunities where people actually do feel they're getting actual answers and they can ask proper questions are very useful, because I have heard after things like that, oh, you know that people have been worried about that for weeks. Or, you know, someone a bit more senior has come and just, who, you know, was on my team, has gone, that's true then, you really aren't doing that. And they went, the team's been worried for weeks about that. It's like, well, you could have told me. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't know.
And just very quickly on that, I'm sorry, but that's a really interesting point, because from the point of view of the credibility and the trust in the leader, it's far better for them to say, so what issues are people, what are people hearing? And then get the information out that way and respond to it, rather than being appeared to be caught on the hop, like you've just described. So it reinforces the value of asking questions.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It immediately puts me in mind of a quote from Brené Brown, who is a world famous vulnerability researcher from the United States. And one of her kind of adages is this: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And to mirror what you were describing when you were managing James, I worked in staffing and recruitment for a long time in the 90s to the mid 2000s, majoritatively with people who were impermanently employed. So inevitably, I would have to deal with contract extensions. And I found out at a pretty young age that the most effective way to build trust and integrity was to be completely honest and not to lie and bluster in the absence of knowledge. So just being open, what I know our American friends often refer to as radically transparent, I think it yields massive dividends. I think it's perfectly okay to say, and I loved something that you said specifically, I think it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know yet. I think yet is such a potent word. But I think it's probably also true to say that actually within most organisations at the moment, there is probably exacerbated cynicism, because we've just spent the last 8 years, at least since Brexit, not really knowing what the hell is going on, and certainly not having any kind of national plan. I was also minded, and I know I'm jumping around now, when you guys were talking, I was thinking about some of the COVID media updates, and if Patrick Vallance or Chris Whitty were asked their opinion by a journalist, you absolutely respected them because of their capacity to say, I don't know. That's not clear. Whereas some of our departed political colleagues would just blag it, and it was awful. It was painful to watch. Actually, you know, it's humility, isn't it? It's having the humility to say, I don't know, but I will, to your exact point, James, I will go and find out, or it will become clear and we'll tell you as soon as we know. Massive bonus.
The honesty point's the one that jumps out at me, and it's one I can remember from recruiting. And it was a sort of slightly more senior recruitment, and it had been complex. We'd gone through lots of people, and eventually we had 2 candidates who were above the line and were appointable, and we offered to one. And in the way that you often do when you're recruiting, we didn't get back to the second candidate, because in case the first person says no. And we had quite a drawn out 2 weeks with the first candidate, where essentially we kept padding off the second one, and they accepted and then dropped out 2 days later, but it was over a weekend, so we still hadn't communicated to the second one. And I sort of made the decision of how to handle the other candidate that we were now going to offer to. And I decided to go, look, I'm really sorry we haven't been more clear with you quicker. I said, I'm going to be honest, we offered the job to someone else. I said, we thought you were brilliant. there were two of you that we thought were appointable. I went, I've got no third place if you now don't want the job. I said, but we offered to someone else for this reason, and they've said no, but we still think you'd be a brilliant hire. I would really like to work with you. And I thought, rather than tell you some nonsense as to why it's been 2 weeks, let's do this. He sort of was quite thrown and asked for a day to think about it, and phoned back and said I was thrown, but actually I appreciated you saying that. And he said, I probably would have said no, because I knew I was obviously not your first choice, and I felt quite messed around. But I appreciated you saying that, and it makes me a bit more confident to come. And I put the phone down the day before and thought, have I really screwed this up? But I just couldn't see a way through the phone call without leveling, especially as it's someone I'd have to work closely with. And he joined and was absolutely brilliant. I was glad to say we felt really lucky he joined, and the first person had dropped out. But it was a much less comfortable conversation than it might otherwise have been. But I do think people respect actually being treated intelligently. And I think companies often don't do that. There's this approach where sometimes there's, oh, we're all one big happy family, or we all really believe in the mission. It's like, well, no, actually, ultimately, the company's job is to look after itself. And that can be enlightened. It can want people to progress. It can be happy that people will leave and go to other places. But the company is about the survival and the success of the company. There may come a time when that doesn't align with everyone who works there. And I think most professionals understand and respect that, and would rather be talked to like that. We like having you here, we value you, we want to develop you, but let's not pretend that we're some permanent family unit. And I think often there's a desire to make it like that. And I think it lands quite badly, especially I think most people I know, I'm coming up to 40, I've worked in 5 or 6 different places, and I've been very signed up to where I've worked when I've been there, but I've also known I would probably leave one day. And I think that's true of most places now. You don't think you're with one place for life. And I think somehow communication hasn't quite caught up. And so people do like that honesty of, okay, yes, you were the second choice, but you were the second choice. We rejected a lot of people before that, and we thought you were very appointable, and let's see how it goes. Or, look, my job is to represent the company's interests. That's what I'm there. I think sometimes HR is quite bad at that. You often see that during redundancies, etc. HR is trying to sort of almost say, I'm here for you. And it's, well, no, you're here for the company. And that's okay. We can deal honestly with each other. We can have a good round of redundancies, but you don't need to pretend you're on my side, because you're on the company's side, and that's fine. That's okay. It's not a divorce.
That is the way that the world has changed, that business at large has yet to catch up with. We, as consumer citizens, expect greater degrees of transparency and openness. And sometimes, well, often that is misconstrued by people in the exec team as thinking, oh my God, I don't want to have to run every minute decision past this huge mass of people. But actually, inclusion and openness go a long, long way. And you said something earlier about if you are open about the fact that you've got a finite amount of budget and you can spend it here or you can spend it there. If you're open, your colleagues will say, oh my God, no, I don't want you to spend that money over here if this is going to be more beneficial to the business. We are all adults at work, but there's still a very patriarchal, kind of paternalistic attitude towards leadership. And I know, Dom, you've talked about this. So one of the things that I think would be really interesting to talk about quickly, and I know this is a huge topic to talk about so quickly, but one of the things that came out of the IC Index report earlier this year was the extent to which AI may obscure leadership communication or may impact leadership communication and the perceived authenticity of it. And I think what's really interesting, and I may be clutching at straws, so just bear with me, this is a hypothesis, is I think it's not unfair to say that most people think communication is easy because most of us are verbal and most of us have two ears, but most people think it's easy, and yet it isn't. It's a skill set and it is an art form, I would say. And to your point, Dom, there are many leaders in the UK and beyond who would benefit from some development in the art of communication. I believe there's a real concern that much of the technology that's being developed by Silicon Valley is being developed by people who don't value social skills, bluntly. And so the question that I have is, to your mind, what threat do you think AI could pose to leadership communication? And obviously there's a flip side, which is, and what could the opportunities be?
So people want to feel empowered. To take the very, very simple thing, I used to say at work, I find being emailed when you're going to go to the doctor and do all of this very, very boring. I went, I will trust you until I have a reason not to. Please don't give me a reason not to. I don't want to track your time. And every now and then I found someone they'd claimed a weekly doctor appointment and they were going to the gym. And I sort of went, look, busted. And I went, I'm going to ask your line manager to have a look for the next couple of weeks. I went, but can you just respect you've been busted? I'll go back to trusting you if you do this, but otherwise we are going to have to introduce a whole system of tracking hours, and that's going to suck. But you get issues with it, but generally it worked, and it really helped us when people needed to stay a bit late, because people had got the feeling that we hadn't chased them if they had a builder coming in or whatever. If they did have to suddenly work till 7 or 8, they'd still be in on time the next day, kind of thing. That, we found that great. Automated systems really, really ruin any sense of autonomy. People feel quite powerless if they're not dealing with a human. And so if you start outsourcing certain functions to a machine in that way, you will disempower people, and people will feel much more sort of zoned out and unhappy with the engagement they're getting. Even if you've got a really good, fair algorithm that's going to allocate holiday, if people are making the case in a message and ChatGPT is getting back to them in 3 seconds with a yes or a no, versus someone taking an hour or two to look at it, that's different. Now, could you set up a system so that AI is assisting on the holiday? Probably. Someone puts in a request, it comes to the human, it comes to their line manager with a recommendation. The AI suggests you approve this person's got loads of holiday still to take. We know that they need it in the school holidays. We know they're a parent. We think you should approve this. Do you need to overrule? Give a reason why if you overrule. It might make doing the holiday a much quicker and easier process for the managers, and you could have something tracking how often they overrule it. So you've still got a human in the process, they've still got someone to go to, but you can have the AI in it. That tends to work. That tends to be empowering. One thing I've seen people do is test emails by asking ChatGPT, you are a worried employee, what's the message you get from this email? Or what different ways might someone interpret this paragraph? And just test whether they've written as clearly as they thought they had. And so they don't ask it to write for them. They ask it to test their messaging. And so AI as an assistant could be very empowering, could help make things quicker, could sort a lot of mundane bits. It tends to not communicate very clearly because it's essentially, one of the people who helped develop all of this calls it spicy autocomplete. When you're writing a message in Gmail and it's sort of, I hope to see you soon or hope to see you next month, and it sort of guesses for you. All that AI is a fancy one of those. And so it's averaging out words, it's averaging out guesses. It will come up with something blancmangy and okay. It's not going to be very clear, and it's not going to be specified to your audience. So if someone's sending low stakes emails and isn't a very assured communicator, it might help them compose an email. But if you're a communications professional, it's probably better used to test your messages and hone them than to write for you. I think people can really overstate what they think it can do. It's good for research as well. If you want to go, hey, what's some good quotes, or what should I read? I want to recommend a book about X. Can you list me 5 for me and say how they differ? It can help you think of stuff. It can help you find stuff. It's not a good fact checker, and it's not a brilliant messenger. But the key thing is people, as much as they can, should feel like they're interacting with humans and not a machine, because that disempowers people and that disengages people. And there's really good research on that. There is evidence for that.
Yeah, I think those are some really good pointers for mainstream adoption of generative AI in organisations, actually. I think that is the gist. And I think, internal communication does have a key role in shaping the way in which generative AI is adopted, because it is a communication tool, and understanding it as an assistant rather than something that you can delegate your communication to as a manager or a leader, in trusting that it is going to come up with a finished, polished product for you. And I think this is, it's going to be an ongoing narrative, isn't it? Because the point, I think, is that the technology was released into the mass market without a user manual. And so everybody is left to figure out for themselves how best to leverage the advantages that the tools bring. And I think your points are absolutely on point and very well articulated.
I think it is conversation, isn't it, about what's it for, what's the purpose, what's the end point. But I also think there's the piece around, whilst we're careful of how we feed it, because it's all an algorithm that's going to just kind of decide. Because if you go back from a mass media perspective or from a social media perspective, it's using that constant data collection to kind of go, this seems to be really appealing to you. Let me push more of that same content, and I'm going to tell you what you should consume rather than work out what you want to consume for yourself, which comes back to the piece around trust and what we then believe fundamentally, because as you say, it's not a fact checker, but then do we need fact checking? So I think it's about understanding what that does in the rounder piece of society as well, and how we work alongside that. I don't know, that's just my perhaps philosophical view on things. But James, as well, I've jotted down quite a few notes as you've been talking quite a lot, and I think there's something around what I think really we've clung to with the crux of this trust, which I think has been really interesting when referencing back to what you were talking about earlier, was about how you've used that in your work in journalism, is when you're thinking about conspiracy theorists and how if you go in combative nature, but if you go in a we nature, or let me understand, or let me see where that comes from, it really, really helps with how we approach those differences. So I think that one of the things, as I've put, is don't be competitive, but don't also let the hypothesis and the curiosity go by themselves. And be consultative, be open and unsure, be adult to adult, be real, and empower people, and make sure we keep AI in the middle, not at the end. I thought those were some of my thoughts.
That's a brilliant set of summaries. That sounds much cleverer than what I said. That's great. One sort of thing to add on that is you can challenge a lot more effectively if you built a bit of commonality before. And we need to challenge in journalism. If we don't ask a hard question, it's a hopeless interview. But it's amazing what you can do if you've asked a few nice questions, built a bit of rapport, but also set some common ground and gone, okay, we agree on this, but come on. And then you offer the challenge up, and it will be taken a lot more constructively than if you open with it. And that work means having hard conversations. And if you can sort of start them in that way and frame them in that way, I think you're much likelier to get a better outcome, even if it's still a nasty conversation. So it doesn't have to mean being nicey and just saying what someone wants to hear. But if you can sort of get that bit of commonality and that bit of we, it means the challenge will be taken a lot more constructively. And also, if you get pushback from someone, you might be more in listening mode than sort of diametric mode of we must now stick to our lines. It is that critical thing of sometimes you're in to fight for a project, or there's something you don't want to happen, and might be in a meeting, it might be in a one-to-one, and you suddenly realise, oh, I'm not sure I'm on the right side of this. And that's useful. Someone else has got to you that way. And that's, okay, I might need to think about it.
But I think it's that remembrance, we all listen more than we speak in general. we will consume more than we let go in general. So if you're playing into that, let me have the we in the dialogue, then you're going to play into that curiosity and that thought process. I think that's really interesting. I guess would that be your, without wishing to presume this is your answer, but I'll ask it, would that be the one thing that you think internal communicators can do to help restore trust within their organisation, switch on the we?
I think probably that, yeah. I think that, and communicate more. Do not wait to know for sure, because just every organisation I've worked in has been a news organisation that puts out news constantly and has still under-communicated. Yeah. And so if we do it, and I've worked in good newsrooms where I've liked the management and the senior management, and they've always under-communicated. And so if we're doing that, I can only assume everyone else is. Maybe it's a newsroom problem, who knows? But I tend to guess not.
I doubt not. No, I think that's as a general thing. I think I think to communicate seems really fearful in these times, but we shouldn't let that fear silence us. Actually, we should go against that fear to communicate more, to bring back honesty and clarity to the world that we need. So, James, but for me, thank you so much. So many things, hopefully, for many of our listeners to take away, and all the great work that you've been doing as well to rebuild trust in journalism and things like that as well. So thank you so much again for your time, James.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode. If you have, please like it and share it on your preferred digital channels. Help us spread the word to build a better, more connected and inclusive future of work.